Hello, everybody. Here we are at Sochi State University in the Volunteer Training Center. And to my right is Alexander Wolff, senior writer for Sports Illustrated, one of the leading magazines in the world. And his assignments for the magazine took him to almost all continents, I think, right? And in many countries. And today we're in Sochi, and I'm going to ask some questions because Alexander has been to some. How many Olympic Games have you been to?
I think it's been 8. My first was in Seoul in 1988, and then Barcelona, Atlanta, Sydney, Lillehammer, Vancouver, and London.
So this means that you've covered both winter and summer Olympic Games, right?
That's correct. Yes, mostly summer, but winter too, and they're very similar. Well, first of all, to be a journalist at the Olympics is a mixed blessing. I mean, the good part is that you're witnessing top-level performances, the greatest athletes in the world, where they're the most motivated that they'll ever be. So that gives you the possibilities of wonderful stories to report on, to write about. That's the good part. The frustrating part is because it's an Olympic Games, because of the security, because of the needs to limit access and so forth, it's very hard to tell these stories as well as we would like. So getting access, getting information, getting it in a timely manner. We have, obviously, if the Sochi Olympics will take place 9 hours ahead of our time in our office in New York, and there are different deadlines for every journalist who's here covering the Olympics. So the urgency of getting timely information is paramount. And our jobs would be made very, very much more easy if volunteers, certainly working in press operations, within the rules, of course, but were as helpful as they possibly could be in getting us information. If it's a case we're in the mixed zone, we're at the barrier with our notebook. And I've had this at Olympics before. There have been very helpful volunteers who have gone off and found an athlete who's farther down in the mixed zone or has their back turned and doesn't realize that we would like to speak to them. And just understanding that we'll be likely to make requests, and the more that can be done to meet those requests for that interview on deadline or for the timely information, even if it can't be answered right away, if it's a pledge to come back with the information, that would be very, very much appreciated.
And can you take us through the day one, let's say, the opening ceremony as a journalist? So where are you in the morning, let's say, and take us through this first day, please.
Well, I'll tell you very specifically my experience in London was I was living in London doing previews for the Olympics for several months before the Games. So I knew from reading the local papers and the press, the coverage, a little bit about what to expect. There were still many secrets, but a little bit of what to expect. So I was starting to formulate what I would write about it. And then one of the great things about the ceremonies is that you are given an embargoed press guide, a media guide, that you're not supposed to share the information that's in it until the event has actually taken place. But it gives you so much information about the history, the cultural background, all the things that are being displayed in front of you during the ceremony that unless you're an expert on, say, British history or in this case Russian culture, it won't make a whole lot of sense to you. So that's very, very helpful. I found in London at the ceremonies also I was tweeting. So there was instant reaction, and then of course I had to set aside that and be more thoughtful for my stories. I wrote both something for our website immediately and then integrated things about the ceremony into my first week story for our magazine, a weekly magazine. So that's modern journalism. You're finding instantaneous Twitter, then one-day news cycle with the web, and then our good old weekly magazine. Well, my background and pedigree and experience and comfort is with paper because that's just where I come from. I like paper. I print out copies of my stories when I can before I send them in electronically because I want to read the ink on paper. I see things, I hear things when it's on paper that I don't when it's simply pixels on a computer screen. But I have changed. I've learned how to use the tools, digital tools, to feed information to me that I can quickly sift through it and integrate it into what I'm working on. And at an Olympics, that's very, very critical. I mean, the info terminals, the apps, now they had a wonderful app in London with information, and there will be one also in Sochi. They're great. They're really great at feeding information. Well, once the events start, I'm in constant touch with my editors. And again, I have two masters. I have the magazine master and I have the web master, who each want content. They want stuff from me. And I make sure that they speak to each other so that they're not both asking me to do something at the same time and there's a conflict. But I will report on what's expected. Our editors are following things. They're back in the main press center and watching all the screens. They have a full schedule. They know what the stories are. But occasionally a story will break. For instance, in Vancouver, I was at the speed skating. And there was this very famous story of Sven Kramer, the Dutch speed skater, who was a favorite. His coach steered him into the wrong lane and he was disqualified. So we would not have normally thought to do much about Sven Kramer. There's not much interest in the US in Dutch speed skaters. But then this happened, it became a very human story. So quickly I was in touch with the office and they realized that, that American television was going to spend a lot of time on it. People were interested. So quickly I changed. So you're reacting to the moments, and of course, by definition, a moment at an Olympics is an Olympic moment. So it has more majesty, it has more pathos, whatever emotion there is felt more deeply. So we have to be ready for that. And every morning you wake up, the night before I try to think, okay, how will tomorrow unspool? But every morning I wake up and kind of double check. And one thing that we do try to do is hit 2 or 3 venues in a day. And one of the great things about the Sochi Games is because they're so compact, because there's a 28-minute high-speed train between Krasnaya Polyana and the coastal cluster, journalists will be able to get to 2 or 3 venues in a day with no problem, maybe even 3 or 4. So that gives us the possibility, the capability of doing really good work, but it also means that we might be a little more stressed. So the volunteers understand that. But it's an Olympics that's set up for really, I think, unprecedented ability to really cover them. Because in a Winter Games, there are only 15 sports or so, and you have, them clustered in 2 places. And you can literally, in 5 or 10 minutes, you can get from one to the other and right there on foot, right there in the Olympic Park. So we're very excited about that. The other thing about volunteers I've found at the Olympics is being informed and being pleasant are equally important. I will say something about my own country when we hosted the Atlanta Olympics. They were incredibly polite, the volunteers. But I was amazed at how little they knew. How often I would ask a volunteer at the Atlanta Olympics a simple question, and the response would be, "Oh, I have no idea, but y'all have a nice day now." Here, I'm trying to do my U.S. Southern accent, but they're very warm, very friendly, but they just didn't have the answers to the questions.
What kind of questions are you talking about?
Simple things. If you're coming upon a venue and you want to know where's the media entrance, or when is the next bus to so-and-so if you're at the transport mall, or is there any way I can get a translator to talk to a coach from a country who doesn't speak English? And even if it's I don't know, what London did with their volunteers is you would ask a London volunteer and they didn't know, says, "I don't know, but I'll find out." And they all knew then the next step, which was maybe taking a mobile phone and calling somebody who did know, or some protocol to get the question answered. And I hope I don't sound spoiled, I hope I don't sound over demanding, or too picky, but if you're training a really effective volunteer force for an Olympics, to me that's, yes, be an ambassador, be diplomatic, be friendly, be warm, be welcoming, but also if you can be informative. And there's no way to anticipate every question we're going to have. There's no way. But if you don't know the answer, have a plan B for helping us find the answer. And some of us are going to be difficult. Some of us are going to be cranky because we've only slept 3 hours, or we're on our 5th cup of coffee with no solid food. But at the end of the 2 weeks, believe me, if the volunteer effort has been good, throughout the main press center, people know, and we appreciate it. And the feeling, certainly in London, if you've had a chance to talk to some of the people who coordinated the volunteers for London, they did a magnificent job. And it was that combination of the attitude and being well informed. Yeah, I thought, I don't think being friendly is culturally specific. I think if you've reached the point of winning the Olympic bid and are staging the games where your national pride is at stake, I think people are, certainly if they have volunteered, which literally means they've raised their hand and said, I want to help, I think their attitude is already going to be the right attitude. I think where you might have found the difference between Beijing and London is simply a cultural reticence maybe on the part of some Chinese who are just by nature a little less outgoing perhaps, but no less wanting to be helpful. And I would expect the same thing at any Olympics. In England, the British volunteers were, they didn't want to offend because that's kind of the British are always apologizing for things that you don't understand why. But yeah, I think we in the media, we try to make allowances for cultural differences. And in my own country, in Atlanta, I think that the way the volunteers behaved was, that part of the United States is famous for its politeness. People in the southern states are very, very polite. And that was job one, was to be polite. And job two got kind of lost.
Do you need some private space in order to write a good story, or how does it happen for you as a journalist?
I think everybody works slightly differently. If I'm writing for the web off of an event, it's very quick. I'll do it probably in a noisier environment, either in the venue press center or out in the press tribune where there's power for your laptop. If I'm writing for the magazine, the weekly magazine, it's a longer story that might be a little more thematic, more like an essay than a report. And for that, I'll probably want to write either in our office in the MPC, which is a little quieter, or ideally back in my hotel room where it's totally quiet. And during the course of a week, because sometimes I'm writing for the web, sometimes for the magazine, my assignment will change depending. But it's not so much waking up in the morning and then deciding where to go. It's deciding the night before, waking up in the morning, getting a good breakfast, then double checking, do we want to do what we decided to do the night before, and then going out and doing it. And if it's say a Wednesday or a Thursday, late in the week, and I have a story for the magazine that's due on a Saturday or a Sunday, I might simply go to 2 or 3 events where I have no interest in reporting on the action in real time, but I'm simply gathering information for my big magazine story that I will write Friday, Saturday, and turn in Sunday morning. So it's a little different for me. If it were a daily newspaper journalist or somebody filing for the web constantly, it's like input, output, and you're processing information, and speed and brevity is important. Yes and no. I think if you're working in that mode, you're conscious of deadlines and the urgency, definitely, which is stressful. But I find when I'm writing on a deadline for the weekly magazine story, I have 3 or 4 days to do the reporting, but I'm always conscious of I've got to move this story forward, and I have to kind of push forward to the end.
When do you see volunteers, and where do you think you might need their assistance?
Well, literally, the first volunteers you encounter are when you get accredited. When you're at the airport, and you might get accredited at the airport. You know, the good Olympic organizers have set up accreditation centers right at the airport. So it's a combination of making you official, welcoming you. It's the first impression. So if you're a volunteer at an airport accreditation center, or even an accreditation center on the ground, you will be the public face, making that first impression to a member of the media. I found in London, volunteers who were incredibly helpful were simply the ones who were stationed in the concourses outside venues, who could point in directions. They had brightly colored clothing so you could recognize them. You know, as you're walking by, you didn't even have to break your stride, and you could ask a question and they would point, and it was, they were smiling, you'd smile back, you were informed, you were on your way. They were like human signposts, and it seems like a very easy or almost unnecessary job. Why couldn't there be good signs? But there are good signs, but having a human being when you have so many people could be great. And then, say I covered a lot of basketball at Olympics over the years. By the end of a fortnight, you know the volunteers very well. We've lived together here for 2 weeks almost at a venue. And over that time, I think you learn how to make reasonable requests of the volunteers. The volunteers have learned how to anticipate some of your needs. And I think any of us in the media would do well to just take the time to talk to a few volunteers and say, look, I'll be doing this every day for the next 11 or 12 days. I will need this and this. Could you help me? And you don't want to interfere with their ability to report to their own boss. You don't want to do that, but or go to whoever the venue manager is, or the venue press chief. We will do that and say, boy, it would be great if we could have this or that.
And could you explain, just for the Russian audience, what do you mean by saying anticipating the needs of reporters or journalists?
Yeah, I think the biggest time where we're under pressure is when an event has ended, and we need information, and the mixed zone and the press conference are imperfect but necessary things. The press conferences tend to generate very little raw information because everything has to be translated. So the amount of real usable stuff is in half from what you think it would be. And then the mixed zone is you have a physical barrier between the reporters and the athletes. And sometimes you have to get the attention of an athlete to come down and talk to you. And again, that's where a volunteer can be really helpful. You can say, look, this happened for me in London. I needed to talk to a woman from Botswana who had run in the 400 meters. And I got a hold of a volunteer who knew where she was back in the mixed zone, was able to pull her out. And that's the most stressful time for us, because that's our one little window to get access to an athlete, is in the mixed zone after they compete. Because with few exceptions, we can't really go into the village and speak to them there. We may not have the ability to have a mobile phone number for a coach to set something up. So it's a stressful time right after an event.
You know, what do you expect from a good volunteer?
Well, generally, for any volunteer, I think, yeah, it's just that. Well, for press, yeah, being aware of what's going on in your venue, you know, understanding the sport, understanding the protocols, recognizing early in the competition the personalities of some of the important people, the coaches and the delegation chiefs, and understanding that after playing in a match or a game, the athletes and coaches are going to be exhausted and emotional, but at the same time, the press is going to be stressed, and somehow understanding that they are diplomats that are trying to accommodate both of these people. So just being having a high EQ, the emotional intelligence quotient, the emotional IQ, we sometimes call an EQ. So you're just very sensitive to others. I think that would be a great quality in a volunteer in a press venue operation, but just generally any volunteer, strike the balance between being welcoming and being informed. Those are the two things.
What is your message to, let's say, volunteers of Sochi 2014?
I hope that volunteers of Sochi 2014 are excited about this moment in their country's history. Olympics come to a country every half century if you're lucky, you know. And, London's done 3, but they've been 50 years apart, more than that. So be proud of your country. Understand that people wouldn't be here unless they were curious about your country. But also remember that you've been chosen to be an ambassador, and we're delighted to meet you and learn from you.
Okay, thank you very much, Alexander. It was Alexander Wolff, a senior writer for Sports Illustrated. Thank you very much.
My pleasure, thank you. Thanks, my pleasure.